Hey, what's up, guys? This is the lecture to help with your assignment. Competition shapes ecosystems. Okay. This assignment, this video is going to be pretty short. I just wanted to kind of take a minute of me explaining some things. I know that we've had a lot of videos, some articles, and we've been talking about competition. But I just kind of wanted to break it down into simpler terms for us because a lot of us are kind of making this more complicated than it needs to be. Okay, so when we're talking about competition in nature, we're talking about two species or more than two species that are competing for resources, right? And when we say this word competition, it's not like they're playing a game like with a set of rules where they're like the winner gets their food, right? No, we're talking about the way this looks in a lot of different ways. Okay, if I have two plants that are growing next to each other from seeds, right? There's competition between those two plants for resources, right? If it rains, if one of those seeds is better at absorbing water than the other one, they're going to have an advantage, right? They have a competitive advantage. Sometimes it might come down to luck. One of them gets more water than the other, but let's say those seeds start to grow, right? If one of them can grow a little bit quicker than the other one, and it starts to, it can get more sun and it kind of casts a shadow to that other plant, that bigger plant is competing with that smaller plant for those resources. Okay? Um, with animals, it's easier to think about, right? If we said that there are, like bunnies and coyotes living in a certain area, right? And there's plenty of grass and whatever other stuff bunnies eat, right? They have all their resources. Let's say, for whatever reason, there's not very many coyotes in this area. Okay? Well, if there's plenty of resources, we have an announcement. Hold on.
Flashback Friday, we are going to do a group picture in
Sorry,
5 minutes
just let that announcement go.
at the outside bleachers near the O building. Outside bleachers in 5 minutes. If you dress up for Flashback Friday.
Okay, so like those bunnies, right? Let's say there's not very many coyotes and there's tons of grass. There's tons of shelter. There's plenty of places for these bunnies. Well, in a normal season where there's, not very much food or there's predators, let's say a bunny has a litter of bunnies, like a set of babies, and let's say only 2 out of 10 survives, right? Maybe from lack of food or predators or whatever else it may be. Well, if there's a year where maybe it's a warm spring, there's not very many predators, there's plenty of food, well, that could lead to a few generations where instead of only 2 out of those 10 babies surviving, maybe 8 out of 10 of those babies survive, right? And now if those 8 have plenty of food and there's mates, now those 8 all find a mate, they live happily ever after, and now they have babies. Now their babies are going. So as those resources are up and those limiting factors are down, our populations are going to go up, right? But if we start to have a limiting factor, like let's say a predator, right? And now there are coyotes in this area where even if those bunnies make it past, their childhood, their infancy, if they are getting eaten by predators before they can mate, they're not having more babies, then that's going to reduce that population, right? So that could be a limiting factor like a predator that limits how many of those bunnies could live, right? And then depending on how much of those bunnies there are as a food source, that kind of sets how many coyotes there could be in that area, right? Because we couldn't just have a million coyotes show up because now there's not any bunnies. Okay, so those things lead to the carrying capacity, right? The more resources we have, the less limiting factors we have, the more of a species there can be. That would raise the carrying capacity of that environment. But as those resources start to lower or those limiting factors start to increase, like predators, right, then that population is going to decrease because there's not food or there's something hunting them, right? So if we have lots of resources and no limiting factors or few limiting factors, we'll have a high number in that population, right? But if we have low resources and high limiting factors, right, like predators or disease or whatever, then we're going to have low population, okay? It's also important to understand that we can have competition within a species or between species, right? So when we're talking about those bunnies trying to survive, that's competition within those species of bunnies, right? Because those baby bunnies have to get enough food, they have to get shelter, they have to be able to survive, and they're fighting over those things with other bunnies, right? It might not be a physical fight, but if they get to the food, they eat it, the other bunny doesn't, that other bunny doesn't have food, right? So that would be a competition within a species. But even still, let's say, okay, well, those bunnies are eating the same food as, let's say, I don't know, squirrels, right? So now those bunnies and those squirrels are competing over the same things, right? Doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a physical fight. There could, but it's this idea that they are trying to get more resources than the others, okay? Whatever gets the more resources has a better chance of survival. It's not really in our standards, but into next year when we start to talk about adaptations and genetics, you'll start to learn about how things that are built a little bit differently have advantages, right? So let's talk about if we were saying there's like bunnies in, a snowy area, okay? If there are white bunnies in a snowy area, they have a better chance of being able to avoid predators than, let's say, a brown bunny, right? But if we took those bunnies and we put them in the middle of the forest, that white one's going to stand out, right? So differences within those species can give advantages over others as well. That's a little bit beyond what we're talking about. We're just focused on this idea that when there's a lot of resources, the population can go up. And when there's not very many resources, that population is going to go down. All right, dudes. Hope that helps. Good luck. Ask any questions if you need it. Peace out.